faculty and recently relocated back to Pennsylvania. If you look at, I would say, 10 to 20% of the oncologic papers that we read, Phil's probably an author on them. He's prolific, but he's also an extremely nice human and an amazing mentor to his juniors. I hope you guys get a lot out of this talk. When I asked Jared and Alexa who they would choose from Hopkins to speak, they both unanimously said Phil, which kind of worked out well for me since I had his email address. And there's Jared. So Phil, I'm gonna, but Jared, you're on mute if you want to say hi.
Sorry, I joined a little late. Hey, Phil, good to see you, buddy.
Hey, Jared, nice to see you. Congrats on the wedding, buddy.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right, so Phil, I'm going to let you take off from here.
All right, Courtney, thank you. Thank you so much for having me this morning. This is, many of you, so some of you may have heard me kind of talk before, and this is a very different talk than you may have ever heard me give, but I hope informative and provocative, and it's meant to be somewhat interactive. So we're going to aim somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour. Sometimes it can run a little bit longer, depending on how interactive you want to be. So we can, we'll make it as fun as you guys want. So I'm just making sure you guys can see the slides. I'm going to switch over to you should see the big slides and not my notes underneath. Does that work?
Yep, totally.
All right, perfect. Okay, so I call this talk the surgical self and a mindful approach to personality and purpose for surgeons. And when I start this, you get kind of one of three reactions when you start talking about mindfulness and surgery, and people first kind of piques interest a little bit. Some people get really excited, and some people get really kind of curious. What does mindfulness have to do with surgery? So we're going to start with a poll, and we'll do a couple of polls and some interactive stuff throughout. So pull out your cell phones. That's the easiest way to do this. I'll give you a little bit of time, and we'll just kind of see. We'll take a little bit of poll and see where the audience is that we're starting with, and we'll keep the conversation rolling from there. So. And I always like to participate and make sure that this thing is working. There we go. All right, so we've got at least one answer and somebody's working. All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds, and there'll be some more polls to kind of work through. If anybody's having issues, just shout out. The way my computer works, I can't physically see you guys, but if you shout, I will hear you. So we'll keep working through this. So we do have objectives just like any other talk, and we want to understand why we would have a rationale for a mindful approach to surgery and surgical training for the residents and trainees in the room. We'll establish a foundation for understanding self and purpose, and understand how personality, energy, and values can help create identity, and talk about frameworks with which we can build a sense of self and sense of purpose in our surgical careers. And so here is, this slide goes over real well in Baltimore. We'll see how it goes over in New York. But Ray Lewis, in his acceptance into the Football Hall of Fame, talked about sometimes how he felt like he had no idea what was going on in the field. And in all fairness, Ray was an amazing football player, an amazing linebacker, and knew exactly what was going on in the field. But he was kind of in a mindful or mindless state and was able to kind of unplug from the cognitive stuff. And our goal today is to really have an idea and understand why this goes on and some of the parallels in surgery. So let's see if we can get, we'll try interaction again here. Let's see if we can type in, this is a free text, so type in any word or words or phrases that come to mind.
Phil, where Where do I type this? Oh, it's on your website. Sorry.
Yeah, you can either go to the web or text text there, and it'll give you in, and then you can kind of type in what you want. There we go. Good. Good. We see some great words here. People, moment, present or presence, awareness, surroundings. And part of the reason to do this exercise is just to see that mindfulness means different things to different people. And that's okay. But we are going to work through some definitions and why we do this. And the last thing I'll ask, just to take one more kind of quick poll here. I use mindfulness in my surgical practice. And let's see if we'll do this one again at the end and see if we change anybody's thoughts or minds here. So A, B, C, and D, if you use mindfulness or you think you use mindfulness daily, weekly, monthly, or what does this have to do with surgery? And I will posit as we get towards the end of this talk, many more of you are actually mindful than you think you are. So I like skeptics too. That helps. I'm skeptical by nature, so that's a great part of this. So what is mindfulness? And in general, mindfulness refers to being kind of present. It's often associated with mindfulness meditation in a lot of the lay press and a lot of the connotations, but it really just refers to being in the moment. But what's really important also about mindfulness is not only being in the present moment, but being there non-judgmentally, not passing judgment or giving any kind of objections to what's going on. And John Kabat-Zinn is kind of one of the founders of mindfulness-based stress reduction in here, and one of the in the U.S. and one of the huge proponents of mindfulness or Western forms of mindfulness. So how does this play a role for us? So in medicine and surgery, we all want to enhance our efficiency. We want to enhance our productivity. We want to create more time. We want meaning from what we do. And at the same time, we're combating burnout, stress, toxicity, all of the issues we have in current medical care. And I'm going to make the argument throughout the day that we can do this through a mindful and intentional approach to life, and not just our career in surgery, but things we do outside of the operating room. And I'm kind of butchering or smashing together a couple mindfulness terms here, but being purposefully intentional or thinking about what we want to do can really help us progress through the day and through our careers. So how do we do this in surgery? Well, first, this starts in the operating room. And in its ideal setting, there's no more mindful or present setting than the operating room. Here's a picture of one of our, when I was at Hopkins, one of the residents and former fellow and scrub tech. Everybody is innately focused on the patient and their issue. Everybody's incredibly present. And when the operating room is humming and working right, this is what we see. We see people being incredibly present. So we know how to do this, but we're not necessarily conscious of it or thoughtful of it. And by being a little more intentional, I'll make the argument that we can get better at it. There are a lot of other implications, clinical care and patient interactions, whether it's procedure-based or in the office, we can be more intentional or mindful. A huge part of learning and teaching, both as a trainee and as a trainer, we can be more mindful of what we're trying to get out of those interactions, how we manage our time, our space, how we manage our electronic systems. We can be more mindful about this. Certainly physical and mental wellness, career goals, productivity, and even diversity, equity, and inclusion has a mindful component to it. And I'm not going to talk on a lot of these things. I'm happy to talk to them offline or speak to anybody who wants to. But what we're really going to focus today on is identity and purpose and what I call the surgical self. So let's get interactive again. Everybody kind of fire away if you don't mind. Just put down some thoughts about what you think of when you hear, who's the classic surgeon? What does that surgeon look like? What are some of the characteristics of that surgeon? I will type in my favorite word here, which is dogmatic, authoritarian, abrupt, alpha, white, absolutely, male, undisputable, arrogant. These are all very appropriate, and we've all seen them, and many of us express these at times. And so, in this country and in this world, the classic surgeon is a white male. And while that physical image is changing, we're still not there, but it's changing. It is absolutely still a revered and noble profession. But many of us trained and have seen and continue to see where poor behavior was acceptable, sometimes encouraged, but at a minimum tolerated. And how many of us heard the saying, "Oh, we don't care so long as they're a good surgeon." And we saw and trained and saw as example lots of bad examples. We saw people who had poor family lives, interpersonal skills, but were acclaimed because they were academically productive or great in the operating room. And I don't think that's who we all want to be anymore. And I don't think that's how we see the field moving forward. So let's flip this on its head. Let's talk about the ideal surgeon now. Put down some thoughts of who you would want to be operated on by. What does that person look like? Hands, smart, compassionate, altruistic, caring, kind. Got another arrogant in there. I don't know if that's a typo. Good, intelligent, technical. Yeah, all really important things. So I'm going to write down or show you kind of a list of characteristics. Gracious, thoughtful, peaceful, purposeful, self-control, calm, focus on service, focus on transcendence or things other than them. And if you want, once again, I can't see you guys on Teams, but feel free to shout out if anybody wants to take a guess at what this is describing. I think these are great characteristics of a surgeon, but it's not a surgeon. I'll give you a clue. These are characteristics of the Dalai Lama or of a monk. And if you, in Buddhist tradition, there's something called the paramitas, which are the qualities of enlightened beings. And these are amazing qualities, not only for an enlightened being, but listen, for a surgeon or somebody in medicine. Generosity, ethical conduct, patience, honesty, effort and concentration, wisdom and expertise, goodwill and serenity. And I think things we can all work to and would like to emulate. And while it's really hard to get there, these are things that we can work towards. So fair to say that not all of this is going to resonate with everybody, and it's really hard to put this in everybody's context. And Buddha said that you're not going to practice what he taught unless it worked in the context of your own life. And I would say the same thing here. We got to think how this works for the individual. So some of us were scientists or physicians in basis. So some of us are going to focus on data and hypotheses, and I'll present some of that today. For some people, rationale and outcomes are going to suffice. But what I'm going to tell you is the goal here is perception. We're not necessarily looking for oncologic outcomes or something necessarily hard data, but I want to change your perceptions, and I want people to start thinking about what it means to be a well surgeon, to be a well physician, and a good person. So we'll start with some pieces, right? You can't play chess unless you know what the pieces do. So we're going to start with some of the pieces. And one of the first things we need to talk about is work-life balance. And I really, I don't like this analogy, the dichotomous work-life balance, right? This tells you when one goes up, the other must come down, and you're playing a zero-sum game. And I don't think that's fair for a number of reasons. First, we have a number of dimensions to who we are and to what it means to be well. And it's way more complex than just up and down, work versus life. I've come now to come back to the work-life balance analogy, but I think it's much more complex. Some of you may know I really like yoga. I'm into yoga. And so I think of this much more now as a complex yoga pose There are pushes and pulls, contractions and relaxations. It can be really painful at times and uncomfortable, but this is what work-life balance is like. Pushes and pulls, ins and outs, comfort and discomfort. And you know, this is complex to think about these 8 realms here, but there's a PhD psychologist at Penn. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Friedman yet, but he breaks it down into kind of 4 realms that we work in. And this is a nice analogy, right? We have work, home, ourselves, and our community. For most of us, this Venn diagram looks something more like this, where work is a huge part of what we do. Home life is there. We probably pay a little bit of attention to ourselves, and our community is often detached from who we are. In the ideal world, we can get these things to overlap, but that's almost impossible. We're talking about Jesus Christ, the Buddha, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, and Gandhi here, right? If you can get everything that you do to align in the same direction, you're pretty special. But the goal is to take these things where they are and create more overlap. And creating more overlap, aligning what we do, allows us to produce harmony in these domains. It reduces some of the psychological interference we get from being pulled in different directions and generates discretional energy, right? By working in the same direction, all of a sudden we have more energy and time available to us that we have control over. And Lao Tzu said, in work, do what you enjoy, and in family life, be present. And I think it's a great analogy as we think of balancing the components of our work and our life. So to provide another framework, I'm an old physics nerd. I was a physics major in undergrad. So I think a lot in physical nature. And so this is a framework I love. And when we talk about how we can manage ourselves and get better, I think about our dimensions, right? We have space and we have time, X, Y, Z and time. And when we put those things together and we learn how to work through them, we get routine. Obviously, space and time we've learned through physics and other facets is not so simple, right? These things are really complex. It's not just simple 3 dimensions in time, but we can certainly work through these things and understand how they impact. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on space and time management today, but we can at some point if you ever want to. We're really going to focus on the self and who we are. And our self, we're made of a number of components in its simplest form: physical, cognitive, emotional, and interpersonal components of who we are. And when we put those things together and distill them, we can work on purpose and who we want to be. So when we think about being a mindful surgeon, there are 2 main components here: performance optimization, right? We can be mindful and intentional in what we do. We get ready for the operating room. We get ready to take care of patients. We can work on our interpersonal skills and how we manage our teams. We can work on our space and time. And what we're really going to focus on today is knowing who we are. And we'll talk about personality. We'll talk about behaviors, importantly, being kind to each other and to others, generating positive energy, and a concept called Dharma. So a lot of you sit here and go, this is really challenging. How do we do this? And especially the trainees in the room are going to sit there and look and say, we are pulled in so many directions. We work so hard in the hospital. We have no time to ourselves because we're covering everything else. And that is fair. I get it. It's not that long ago that I was a trainee. I understand that. But I'm going to flip that on its head a little bit here. And this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was a psychologist, and this was developed as a framework to develop how we get to what Maslow called self-actualization, or our highest potential. And all the way on the bottom of that are our physiologic needs: food, water, warmth, rest. And it progresses up: safety, belongingness, esteem. And I've kind of modified this into a Maslow in medicine form. And what you see here at the bottom: physiologic needs, well-being, nutrition, sleep. And what I would tell you is these are often the first things we forget about in med. We're busy, especially in training. We're busy, we've got time. The first thing we give up is our workouts. We're tired when we get out of the hospital for the day. We just want to go home, eat some fast food, and go to sleep. But I would tell you, by really focusing on your physiologic needs, your well-being, physical, mental, nutrition, sleep, you will create energy and time to do better and climb up this pyramid and climb up this ladder. In clinical practice, just to kind of go over this quickly, safety and stability is our clinical practice in medicine, right? Is our clinic full? Is our OR working efficiently? Are we being paid and incentivized in the proper way to be productive? That also really hard as a trainee, right? You have less control over your time and what you're doing during the day. But where trainees have the opposite is they have a lot, the interpersonal relationships can be really strong because of your co-residents and colleagues. And obviously, as we climb up this ladder, we can start being more academically, clinically productive, and then work towards leadership roles, work towards mentorship and coaching as we get towards the top. And so I'll make this argument that this was an article published in the New York Times. It talked about how COVID affects us, but we have a tremendous number of paths available to us at any time. And while you may end up today not necessarily be somewhere you want, you certainly can change that and end up in a variety of directions. So I'll challenge you to be thoughtful and open as we move through this. So we're going to start with concepts of self. And I would say one of the biggest struggles in medicine, or some of the biggest struggles that we see, actually originate in identity confusion. And I'll challenge you to think about this now. When you see people really struggling, think about this identity confusion issue. And it's where our reality does not meet our perceptions or expectations. And this can be for ourselves. We think we're someone other than we are in our practice. Our department or our chairperson may see us as someone different than we see ourselves as, or our institution may see us as someone different than we think we are. And this is one of the real, this can be one of the real big issues in breaking down this barrier and creating identity alignment and knowing who we truly are is, I think, one of the bigger ways we can overcome a lot of these wellness issues and burnout issues in medicine and in surgery. And so this question of who am I, obviously big question in Eastern medicine, but it's not just exclusive to Eastern medicine. This is the source of the existential movement. This is a source of a variety of questions throughout human history. I'm gonna pop some quotes up throughout the talk today, and I'm not gonna read them all to you, but this question of who we are and is really one of the eternal questions for humans, both as individuals and as a species. So word games are fun. Here's a good one. Health, healing, and holy all derive from the origin of whole, being one. And another great word that is similar is integrity. And this is often erroneously associated with morality. And often moral challenges can make us question our integrity or our wholeness, but integrity actually has to do with a sense of being whole, a sense of being undivided or being one. And the Dalai Lama says the ultimate source of peace is in the mind, far more than the circumstances we're in, and this will help us determine our happiness. So believe it or not, you can find the answer to this peace in your mind in Las Vegas. And it really any casino you walk into Las Vegas will have a sign that says you must be present to win. And presence is really both the challenge and the reward of answering the question, who am I? And I love this quote by Father Richard Ward that if you think about all of our spiritual teaching, it's really about how to be present in the moment, whether it's through a Catholic tradition or a Christian tradition, through Judaism, Buddhism, or Hinduism, through secular movements. This is really about how to be present. And all of our truths can kind of be reduced to that sense of unity and oneness. And this really is an example and an opportunity to think about how diversity and all this breadth of who we are is really brings us together because we're all united in the same cause. And if we think about some of the religious traditions, right, the Sabbath was created to be present, to focus on the most important things in life one day per week, no matter what tradition you're on, to take time away from work, to take time away from the other stresses of life and really focus on what's important. The Greeks had a system for this, right? A lot of us are familiar with the Kronos theory of time, right? Kronos was the Titan who became the example of Father Time. This was quantitative time, but the Greeks also had Kairos, which was in between time, a qualitative experience really tied to being in the moment. There are huge analogies in sports. Nobody knows who this is. This is a guy named Larry Gelwicks. He is the winningest high school rugby coach in history. That doesn't mean much to a lot of us, but he's got a pretty fabulous record, and he's a motivational speaker now. And he talks about this motivation of winning, and it's not just winning the game, but it's WIN, which stands for what's important now. And the way he motivates his team and talks to them is, don't think about what happened 5 minutes ago in the game. Don't think about what's going to happen 10 minutes down the road. What does the team need to happen right in this moment? And he says to operate at the highest level of contribution requires that you deliberately tune in to what's important here and now. And everybody's favorite fictional coach, Ted Lasso, living in the moment, it's a gift, and that's why they call it the present. So if you ever have trouble trying to figure out what it means to be present, many of us have pets. Think about those animals. This is Sam. Sam unfortunately died during COVID, but Sam was an incredible dog. She loved the beach. She loved tennis balls. And our pets give us a tremendous example of what it means to be present, right? Think about it. When we come home, they're fully tuned into who we are and greeting us. When it's time to eat, they're fully focused on eating. When it's time to walk or exercise, they're entirely focused on that, and nothing else matters in life. And Michelle Okadonor says, a bird gets up every morning and sings its song. It doesn't wait to hear what the other birds are singing or to see if another bird is getting more notice. It just knows innately and sings. So how do we know what our song is? How do we figure that out? So here's the framework. We're going to start with personality. By knowing who we are by our innate personality, we'll have strengths and weaknesses. We can work extrinsically on our behaviors and attitudes, and this represents some non-modifiable and modifiable components, I would say. We can talk about our energy, which is certainly modifiable. We want to work towards positive energy. And we'll talk about purpose and how purpose can give us presence as we work towards goals, vision, values, and mission. And how do we do that? Well, internally, we will adapt a framework for our life and an intentional approach for purpose. But externally, and I'm not going to spend time on this today, but we should certainly seek out mentors and coaches. We want to identify stakeholders. These are people who are going to not only provide guidance, but accountability for what we say we're going to do. And a lot of us have significant others. They are sometimes our most important stakeholders, and we should share these goals and purposes with them. I tell my wife routinely, this is my goal, this is where we want to go. Am I meeting that goal in our relationship, with our children, in life? And so I tell you, she will keep me accountable. And I would encourage you to find stakeholders who will keep you accountable too. So let's start with personality. So if we get into the personality literature and science, there are, in general, what are called 5 big personality traits. They can be organized in a variety of ways, and there's actually a lot of biology behind this. For instance, agreeableness is associated with high natural levels of oxytocin, where neuroticism is associated with hypersensitivity of the amygdala and the kind of central primitive brain. But biology does not necessarily determine destiny, and it's important to recognize that. I think we all know that. But it's also important to know where we map out on this. And personality in general is something we're born with or kind of inherit. There's not a lot of mobility here, I would argue. And there's lots of ways to figure out who you are. These are just some of the examples of personality tests you can find. Most of them are free online now. I'll show you some of mine. This is the Myers-Briggs. I am a intuitive extrovert who is thinking and perceiving, which describes me pretty fairly. But what's important is not only understanding the positive descriptives, but what the potential negatives of that. And this describes me perfectly. One of the negatives of an ENTP is that they get so excited about the next task that they often fail to complete one task. And this has helped me in both my academic life and other endeavors, because I stay focused and say, all right, let me finish one thing before I move on to the next. This is called the Aneogram, which is a slightly more complex personality system. And I'm not going to get too much into the details, but I will tell you I am a 3-8, which means I'm an achieving challenger. But what's really interesting about the Aneogram system, and this once again can be done online, not only tells you who you are, but tells you who you interact with well, who you interact with poorly, and how stress and growth can kind of modify your personality. It really gives you a framework for our understanding how you interact with other people, which I think is really important as we understand who we are, not just who we are, but how we interact with others. And, listen, there's less complex ways of doing this too. In the caste system in Hinduism, the basic premises, and bear me a little bit of mobility on this one, but the basic premise is that society cannot exist without all types of people, and we have complementary roles. We can't progress unless we have people who play all of these roles. The problem with the caste system and where it falls flat is that they put rank to role. And what's really important is that each role is important as each other. And I stress this to my team here at Penn and in our clinics. The person who cleans the floor is just as important as the surgeon, is just important as the person who schedules surgery, is just important as the person who picks up the phone. We need rank, we need hierarchy in medicine for safety reasons, for quality reasons, for other things. But we can't exist without each other, and we need to value each other importantly. And how does this play a role? Well, there's literature on this, right? Surgeon leadership style is related to adverse events, and this is data from Michigan. 35 surgeons, 1,300 operations each, so 44,000 operations. Those surgeons did another personality test, basically. And what they found was there were the highest complication rates in surgeons who lacked constructive and passive styles. So really interesting that your personality can actually play into how things happen in the operating room. So I would tell you, I told you personality, I think, is largely fixed. That's our stone, but our energy levels are highly moldable, and that's our clay. So we're going to talk a little bit about energy. Another physics analogy I love to use here is that as we think about the progression of physics and energy, we start with Newton, where each person is separate from everything else. One reaction is met by an equal and opposite reaction. Einstein and relativity tell us that matter and energy are certainly intertwined. But now in string theory and kind of our most contemporary understanding of physics, that everything is actually pure energy. And it's not only external forces, but internal forces that determine kind of what exists in the physical world. And I think there's a lot of good analogy there for who we are as people and how we interact. So this is a model called energy leadership put forward by another PhD called Bruce Schneider. I'm not going to walk you through the details here, but the concept is at low levels of energy, or levels 1 and 2, we have negative energy. And as we climb up this energy scale and we go from apathy, anger to forgiveness, compassion, peace, and at its highest levels, joy and passion. Yeah, most people are not at joy and passion. We're talking about monk level existence here and people who are fully devoted to this, but we fluctuate between these energy levels. It's kind of always in flux, but the higher we climb up that scale, the more energy we have available to us and the more positive we are. And the really important threshold is between level 2 and level 3 energy. And I'll just show you some examples here. I'm not going to read it out, but basically level 1 and 2 energy is negative energy. It's about control. It's a negative impression of the world, where as we cross over, we start being more positive with our energy. We think about solutions. We think about purpose. We think about opportunities. And another great analogy from science is this is catabolic energy versus anabolic energy. And in our lives, we want to generate anabolic energy. We want to build. We don't want to break down ourselves or people around us. And so we can put personality and energy together and fuse them. And there's a great way to think about this. And not only leaders think about this a lot because we think about our staff, but you want to think about where you fit in this 2x2 square also. You can think about performance and values. And Jack Welch is the former CEO of GE, not necessarily a great human being, but certainly has some controversy around his life and his management styles. One of his styles was to fire 10% of the workforce annually. That will keep everybody highly motivated and constantly improve who you are. That's probably true, but probably not the greatest way to run a business. But he came up with this 2x2 box, which I think makes a lot of sense. This talks about performance versus values. And when we have high performance and high values, these are amazing, competent, outstanding colleagues that we work with. These are people we want around us all of the time. On the flip side, when we have low performance and low values, these are people Mr. Welch called incompetent assholes. These are people that are not only you want to get rid of, but they're fun to get rid of. But the other two boxes cause challenges. And high performing people who have low values, low energy, these are people you either need to give an opportunity to remediate, but don't value performance over value, right? And this is where a lot of organizations fall short. they value people who perform well but don't behave well, and that can create a lot of discord. Whereas people who have low performance but high values can be coached. These are people we can move along, we can bring forward to be better. And so not only important to think about these things as an organization, but think about honestly where you fit in this 2x2 box. How does your leadership view you? How does your institution view you? And how can we all move towards that upper right corner? And if we want to create change, we'll make the argument that identity is the best way to make an intentional process, or the best way to build change. We can take an intentional process, I want to be a happier person, and change it from a goal to an innate process. And there's actually neuroscience behind this. And taking that intentional process and becoming innate is actually the neurosurgical change here. We do that by lots of little changes. This is not going to happen overnight, but by being conscious and thoughtful about who we want to be and the direction we want to move in, we can take things from the conscious to the innate. And how do we do that? Well, there's a process here called the growth equation. A lot of you have probably heard of this, and it's stress plus rest equals growth. But what we forget is that rest is actually a huge component of this. And so we see this is a concept called periodization. It comes from exercise science, but it's really analogous to almost everything we learn and do. I'll give you the analogy of bicep curls and getting stronger arms, right? If you want to get bigger biceps, we isolate that capability. We do bicep curls. We provide the stress. We add weight. We rest and recover, and we repeat that process, adding additional stress. That's how we're going to get bigger arms. But it's also how you can become a better surgeon, how you can become a better trainee, how you can become a better spouse, a better parent. Provide stress, rest and recover, isolate the capability, and repeat. This process happens through a change from what we call system 2 to system 1 learning. And system 2 learning is our slow thinking. This is effortful, logical, thoughtful, tough processes. And where system 1 is unconscious, fast. And we can get from system 2 to system 1 with time and repetition. Those of us who have children or have seen children kind of grow up, right? We've all seen our kids, we've all seen children take their first steps, and then quickly within a few months, they're running all over the house. It goes from very rational cognitive thought to innate. The alphabet, math, and that's all in children. But we think about the way we progress through surgery and surgical training. Things which are often very slow and logical and take effort at the beginning of our surgical training become unconscious, fast, and automatic as we progress. So remember this as you're a trainee and as we're training people, where they are in this pattern. They may still be in the cognitive, slow part of this, and we're trying to help them get into the fast part of it. And the physiologic mechanism, importantly here, is actually myelination. So not only does myelination happen with repeated behaviors, but it actually happens at night during sleep. So ignoring our sleep is a major detriment to learning and progressing. And this brings us to Malcolm Gladwell, and a lot of people know at least the story from this book, and that's the 10,000 hour rule. And this is a fascinating paper. I would encourage anybody who's interested in this. The actual paper is like 45 pages long. It's way too much, but there's about a 3-page section that actually goes over the experiment where the 10,000 hour rule comes from. And this was a study of violinists and pianists in Europe. And the 10,000 hour rule is actually probably the least important part of this paper, in my opinion. And that's actually an extrapolation or an estimation of data. But what's really fascinating in this paper is it wasn't just 10,000 hours, but the best students, the best musicians had deliberate practice and they had deliberate rest. They worked really hard and were really focused on their music when they were doing that. And then they really detached and they gave themselves rest and recuperation. Rest in the afternoon, more hours of sleep at night. That made them better musicians. And I would tell you the same thing probably holds true for surgeons. So where does this kind of fit in here for doing and learning? So motion, we actually have to strategize and learn, but it doesn't often produce results. Where we have to act and behave to deliver an outcome. To learn, we must do. That kind of builds the neurologic circuits, neurons that fire together, wire together. So repetition, repetition, repetition. but so it's not only how long we do these things for, but it's the repetitions. It's how many times we do it. That's what helps us make it automatic. And there's data here. This is a sociologic study which talks about kind of changing behavior. So this is walking after breakfast, building in an exercise habit. And these are curves from just one paper about learning curve for radical prostatectomy. They look almost identical, and you can see a variety of learning curve papers in our surgical literature that parallel these phenomenon we see outside of that. And the last little piece here I'll talk about identity is that institutional identity supports individual identity and vice versa. We build good people around us. That helps build our individual identity. By being a good person and starting with ourselves, we can improve the people around us. So we need to work together. So building presence through personality and energy. First, understand who you are. What are your innate strengths and weaknesses? Seek out those who contrast and enhance who you are, and then craft your personality and behaviors, and importantly, your positive energy to fit productive models at work and in life. So I'll pause there before we get to purpose. If anybody has any questions, comments, and we'll finish with purpose and how we get there. So we'll finish with purpose, and how do we get to purpose? So there's a number of exercises, and I'll actually walk you through it. We'll do a couple more exercises together. When I coach people or I mentor them, I work through these steps with them explicitly. It really helps us understand who we are. And once we have purpose, we can think about what our priority is, what are our other goals, and then develop a mission statement. So we're going to start with core values. Here's kind of a list of them. I'll ask you once again, let's put down our core values. Think of things that are really important to you and kind of type them in here. Good. Reputation, time, quality, compassion, quality, family. Compassion's getting bigger. Love it. Incredible values coming forward. And I think importantly to recognize different people have different values, and that's okay. We're not all going to have the same things. And one of the stories and books I really like to show surgeons particularly is a book called Altered Traits. And by being mindful and thoughtful, we can actually make these values part of who we are, part of our DNA. And if you're interested in the science of meditation or mindfulness, this is a great book to read. We can actually change our brain morphology, our neural connections, autonomic nerve function, inflammatory cytokines, and at our DNA level, epigenetics and telomere biology by being intentional and thoughtful and mindful about who we want to be. We can permanently not only change who we are, but the genes we pass on through a kind of present or intentional practice. And listen, I get it. Mindfulness and meditation is not for everybody, but by being focused on who we are, we certainly can change who we are at the deepest levels, both scientifically and kind of personality-wise. So let's start with heroes. Let's put it down. Name some of your heroes. You don't have to give specific names if you don't want. You don't have to put Dr. Richstone down, although I would recommend for at least 2 of the trainees to put his name there. There we go. It'd be really interesting if somebody's grandfather is Batman. Yep, we've got family members, we've got fictional people. I love it. We've got colleagues. And just for kind of being polite, I'm not going to mention Dr. Kavusi makes the list. Love it. So I'm not going to mention anybody specifically in urology, but I certainly have heroes in. Somebody put me on there. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm not going to mention anybody specifically in urology, but I certainly have heroes in urology. But this is a picture of 4 urologists. I'm one of them. These are guys I ski with every year. These guys are heroes to me because they keep me balanced. They give me perspective outside of urology and medicine. And they've opened up to me that urologists can be cool. We can be really good friends outside of what we do at work and share our lives together. These are 2 more of my heroes, right? You can have fictional heroes. Han Solo's unabashedly cool, but he's incredibly loyal. Sometimes hesitantly, right? It takes him a while sometimes to get to the right answer, but he does. Bruce Lee was mindful, incredibly talented physically. He was rebellious. He challenged culture, and he created his own path for others to follow. So you can tell I want to be cooler than I am, but it's okay to have fictional heroes too. And these just help us identify what's important to us, who we want to be. The other part of this is who we want to be, but understanding what's our context, what's our life story. So here's just some bullet points of my life story, right? 1980, and I've kind of progressed through my career. I highlight my 2 children there in yellow, Kay and Cameron, 2014, 2017, major parts of my life. But it's not only thinking about the important milestones in your life, but where you're going to be. So somewhere down the road, my kids are going to graduate high school. At some point down the road, I'm going to retire. And how do I want to get there? And we just don't want to end up on that pathway. We want to be thoughtful and conscious how we get there. And there's this beautiful concept of dharma in Eastern philosophy. And dharma, for those of you who don't know, is where passion and expertise meet usefulness and compassion. And it's important to have all 4 of those components. And this is a great, once again, kind of Venn diagram, which shows where dharma meets in the middle. And in medicine, we're drawn to dharma. That's why we do what we do, right? It brings these things together naturally, but we have to cultivate that dharma, and that's really the challenge. And the other really important thing here is that compassion is a part of this. So just because you're a surgeon, just because you're good at what you do, does not give you license to be a jerk. We have to be compassionate and thoughtful about who we are and how we interact with our patients, with the people around us. So this is another 2x2 quadrant, and this is kind of the dharma quadrants. Talks about skills and passion, right? So where we have both skills and passion, this is where we want to play really hard. This is surgery for a lot of us, right? This gives us depth, meaning, and satisfaction. Take time to practice, take time to coach, improve, because we love it. That's what we do. Where we don't have skills and passion, find people who love this. Find other people and honor them. Don't belittle them because they do something other than you do or something you don't do well. Honor them because they do something that you don't do well. Once again, where you have skill but no passion, try to build passion there. Try to bring positive energy and see if you can develop some dharma. But where you have no skill and a lot of passion, these are your hobbies. I love basketball. I play basketball every week. I'm never going to make the NBA, but I still love playing, and it keeps me happy. And I think we all have those things. If you're not buying dharma, there's other ways to think about this. Aristotle said there's 3 kinds of work, and the poetical work was bringing forth activity beyond oneself. Our own Aristotle in Urology, Steve Nakata, says in his book, we can move from performance to purpose to passion as we progress through our careers and refine what we like. So how do we do this again? Just kind of summarizing here. First thing, identify our values. We talked about heroes. One of the other ways to think about this is who you want to be remembered. So I grew up in a Catholic tradition. I'm not going to get into that, but whether you believe in an afterlife or heaven or not, we certainly can live on through how we are remembered and how we interact with people around us. And I just like to highlight for a sec, Chris Wood died earlier this year, and Chris was a tremendous figure in kidney cancer in my field and cancer in general. And we lost Chris way too young, but Chris died exactly who he wanted to be and exactly how he wanted to be remembered. Anybody who knew Chris knew 2 things about him. One, he was a badass kidney surgeon. He was really good at what he did. And second, he loved deeply every patient and trainee he interacted with. That's who he wanted to be, and that's how he will be remembered. And it gives me some solace and positiveness in the fact that we lost Chris too early. Second, we want to take those values and place them in the context of our life. Think about our story, not only where we are now, but where we want to go. And we can break the context of our life down into work, family, research, business. Importantly, by definition, we can only have one priority. That's what the word means. So what is your priority? You can prioritize things underneath that. You can put them in order, but you can only have one priority. And where this becomes really important, for instance, I was at a meeting a few months ago, and there was a kidney cancer session on Friday afternoon that I really wanted to go to. But if I went to that session, I would not have been able to fly out Friday night and get back to my family. And my number one priority is my wife and my children. So I missed the kidney cancer session, and I didn't spend more than 10 seconds thinking about it. It was an easy decision because I know what my priorities are. I know what order to put these things in. To do that, think about where you want to be confident, set down your short and long-term goals, create a mission statement, and revisit this on a regular basis. I'll share you mine in a second. Put it in writing. The act of putting it down, whether you like pen and paper, a keyboard, whatever it is really important cognitive and neuropsychologically to put these things down and then work to cultivate these things. This is hard work. So here's my mission statement. First, I want to be the best father and husband I can be. And secondly, I want to make lasting improvements to the magic of urologic cancers. There's a lot interwoven in there. And actually, this lecture today is helping me achieve both parts of my mission statement, right? This is helping me be a better father and husband and hopefully changing the way we manage urologic cancers. And I love this quote. One changes from day to day. Every few years, we become an entirely new being. I showed you Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're not going to go through it again, but I just put it here as a framework. But Maslow also characterized self-actualizers. The way he came up with this framework was by studying people he called self-actualizers, people who are transcendent. And if you look at some of the highlighted qualities here, these are things we can aspire to. Tolerate uncertainty, accept yourselves and others for what they are, be problem-centered, focus on welfare for humanity, have a deep appreciation for life and little things in life, and have strong moral and ethical standards. In kind of Eastern practices, there's this concept of monkey mind or a confused active mind versus a monk mind. And at the bottom here, to have a monk mind, you want to be focused on long-term gains, committed to a mission or goal, self-control, look for meaning and genuine solutions. And you don't have to be a monk to do these things. This is how we can be purposefully intentional in our lives as surgeons. So how do we get there? What are the behaviors? So experience life like a child. Fully absorb and concentrate on what you're doing. It's something called a beginner's mind if you're into meditation practices at all. Try new things. Get out there and do things differently than you typically would. Challenge yourself. Listen to your own feelings and experiences instead of the voices of tradition or authority. Don't play games. Be honest all of the time with yourself and with others. Search for the truth. Be prepared to be unpopular. If something you truly believe is unpopular, that's okay. That's how we define who we are. Take responsibility, work hard, and identify the things that make you challenging. Have the courage to give them up, to make yourself better, and to work better with other people. And so this was Maslow's behaviors leading to self-actualization, but these are behaviors that can lead us to successful careers in medicine and academic medicine. So importantly also to recognize purpose and needs will evolve with professional development. This was a great paper out of the Mayo Clinic proceedings, and it talks about how everything changes from medical school through residency, fellowship to our progressive careers as attendings. And it's important to recognize that those things are going to change. We're all on a spectrum. And in addition to being a physics nerd, I'm also a Star Wars nerd. There's great analogies here between being an expert versus being a master. And an expert knows the answers, revels in what they know, but the master truly understands what they don't know and revels in what they don't know, seeking other answers. And I would encourage you, paradoxically, to have that beginner's mind. Be curious. Think about what you don't know as you want to master your field. You're not buying any of this, that's okay. I'm okay with that too. You think this is all voodoo and what I'm talking about is crap? I get it. It's hard to kind of take all of this in. There's also scientific rationale. There are psychological constructs that can put this maybe in a better context for you than it does for me. But I believe in this, and I think it makes a huge difference. There are certainly pitfalls, and I'm going to walk you through just a couple of them as we kind of wrap up the talk here and open up for questions. But the first one is failing to intentionally choose, right? If we diffuse our energy and put it out in all different directions, we fail to move down the pathway we want to. So once again, be purposefully intentional. Choose where you want to focus your energy, or others will choose that direction for us. The second major pitfall, and we see this a lot in academic medicine, is the paradox of success. You start off in your early career, you know exactly what you want to do, you have early successes, you get a reputation as a go-getter, opportunities open up, and then all of a sudden you look back a year or two later and you have no idea what you're doing because you're spread so thin, you're burning out, and you're distracted from your highest levels of contribution. Some of that is natural progression. You need to kind of diffuse out a little bit, but being focused and thinking about where we want to be can help us be clear and help us achieve goals. And these are kidney cancer kind of genetic phylogeny trees, but I think there's a great analogy here. This is the academic, or not even academic, this is the career we want. We want to start off broad, right, as a resident trainee, thinking about all of the things we want to be. And as we progress, we want to be more and more focused and better at what we want to do and move in one direction rather than just diffusing ourselves in multiple directions. The last pitfall I like to bring up is mixing values. And one of the easiest examples of this is social norms versus market norms. And medicine often is based on social norms. We're working on mutually beneficial behaviors, right? We work well for our patients, we work well for our colleagues. That's why we do what we want to do. But we're in a system that has market norms. We get paid for what we do. There are business transactions associated with it. And you can't completely detach the two, but we have to be aware of that interaction. And when market norms impede our social norms and our social behaviors, it can cause a lot of conflict. So just be mindful of those contexts and those values. So lastly, I just like to say, this is hard work. This is not easy. So it's our responsibility to defend our dharma, to defend our energy, and tell you, if you're too busy to think, you're just too busy. You got to create time in your day and your week to do that. There is certainly competence versus character. And what I mean here is, listen, we were all trainees. We progress on in our careers, and listen, it doesn't get any better, it just gets different. We still have to do character building work, and what I mean by that is the stuff you don't want to do. You're going to have to answer Epic and your electronic medical record. You're going to have to pick up the phone and call for pre-authorizations when you don't want to do that. So you have to build both competence and character and recognize those opportunities at character building or mindless work to kind of turn that into something else, repurpose that, make it energyful, and be purposeful, be intentional, read, reflect, process what's going on around you rather than just aimlessly kind of walking through this. Huge analogies from sports here, and we'll get here. So when we think about our great performers in sports, Jordan, LeBron, Kobe in basketball, Brady, Jeter, Tiger from other sports, not only did these people have physical attributes and a competitive spirit, but they lifted their teammates and their colleagues with intention. They let their intention spread to the others around them, and this is how we can be transcendent. So, and when we want to figure that out, and we want to work on performance, sometimes focus on something beyond ourselves, reflecting those core values can improve performance. So purpose fosters motivation, motivation gives us effort, effort gives us better performance. Great sports analogy here. So Meb Keflezighi was a above average marathon runner who ran away with the 2014 Boston Marathon the year after the bombing. And he said toward the end, he was remembering the victims from the prior year, and that helped carry him through. So how do we develop our motivations in medicine? So I created, this is a rock that sits on my desk. I gave this to my staff as holiday gifts a couple years ago. When I'm having a rough day and you're questioning why you're doing what you do, I look down at this rock and remember, I'm here to care for people. That's my mantra. That's why I do what I want to do. Everybody's going to have a different approach and different thoughts, but I would encourage you to think about what yours is. We all do surgical timeouts. Now in our surgical timeouts every morning, not only do you progress through all the JCO important things, but we set an intention for the day. And depending on who the resident or trainees in the room are, sometimes it's very objective. I want to learn retroperitoneal anatomy today. I want to understand the renal hilum better. I want to cut out a tumor. Okay, those are good, but it can also work on efficiency or communication or kindness in the operating room. And these are all great intentions to set. So I will end here, and I would tell anybody who hasn't read Viktor Frankel's Man's Search for Meaning needs to do this. It's one of the most powerful, short, easy reads you've ever read. The first half of this book, or more than half, is about his experience in the concentration camps of World War II. And the second half of his psychological construct of our search for meaning. And basically the punchline is we are all searching for meaning in what we do. We can't sometimes we cannot affect our circumstances, but we can affect the way we interact with them. And I would encourage you to kind of think in that way. So how to summarize, a sense of self is a powerful force that can lead to great happiness or struggle. Being present is the key reward for determining who you are. Understanding your personality and your energy can give foundational understanding of yourself. You can complement your personality, you can shift your behaviors and energy, and you can work towards Dharma. Don't believe in Dharma? That's okay. There's lots of other ways to think about this, but it's hard work, and being intentional can help you get there. Lastly, identify stakeholders, not only to help you in the process, but to hold you accountable. So another great quote, tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. If you like this talk or other thoughts or have interests, I started a podcast in the last year, and it's been a great assistance to me. It's called Operate with Zen. You can find it anywhere. I'd encourage you to listen. Reach out to me if you have questions, thoughts, you want to hear different things on that podcast. And I will finish by asking you one more time. How do we plan? Does anyone plan on being more mindful in their surgical practice now? Still got to have some skeptics. Well, that's really nice to see, but it may also be selection bias because everybody else clicked off after I started talking about meditation. Well, good. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to take down the slides. I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts or conversation that anybody wants to get into about this topic or anything else.
Phil, thank you for your talk.
My pleasure, Courtney. Thanks for having me.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So Phil, just incredible talk. I feel like I've seen an earlier iteration of it as well. So it's really just impressive to see your journey and lessons learned and how, how thorough and thoughtful you are in terms of self-awareness and intention. I will mention that I do listen to your podcast, of course, when I'm on my run, so I appreciate those. But, I've always been really particularly struck by your discussions of identity and self, and I guess these, what you call pushes and pulls of work-life balance and how you attempt to align. And then we all know you made this, very exciting, incredible career change. So congratulations again on that. But
thanks.
Given that you have such next level insights into this realm, I'm curious if you've had any specific insights or lessons learned in making such a large and pervasive life change.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared. Thanks for saying that. And I would tell you and tell everybody else, I mean, listen, this is a process, and there are days and weeks I struggle with it, and it's always a struggle. It's always, we call this surgical practice, right? We're in a surgical practice because we're constantly trying to get better. And I think that's part of it, is recognizing that there is no kind of nirvana in surgery, right? It takes time to get there, and we're always going to be improving and always working towards it, and that's part of the process. I think, the career change, and that's a great topic, and it's one of the beauties of medicine is that we can evolve, we can change, we can move in different directions. And the change for me came because I loved what I was doing, and I loved my time at Hopkins. I still love Johns Hopkins, love that place. But there became an opportunity at the University of Pennsylvania, not only to work on the things that I loved working on, but starting to work and develop other people in a more formal way. And I think that was the natural transition for me, where it became less focused on me and able to be focused on other people. And being intentional about that process, to be honest with you, came into the negotiation strategy. And one of the things, I needed to be hired, and I say this carefully, I needed to be hired as a full professor. And part of that was to recognize the things I had done before, but more importantly, to recognize in this leadership role as a relatively young person that I didn't have anywhere else to go upward at an academic level, that I can make it very clear to my colleagues that I was here for them. I'm here to promote your careers and your practice and make that better. I'm fully promoted. I am where I want to be. Now I want to make you where you want to be. And so that's just one of the thought processes and analogies that kind of came into this. And it's just kind of a way to be kind of thoughtful and progressive about your career as you progress through it.
Phil, do you think there's any role for personality testing, for people that just haven't ever done it, and to kind of get a better objective measure of, strengths and weaknesses?
I would encourage everybody to do it. There are formal ways and less formal ways to do it. You can, if you have a little bit of time and you're interested in this, the Aneogram is a great way to do it. Where is it? This book is really thin. This is the Aneogram book. It's like 100 pages, and it'll walk you through it. I think this is better than the online versions, to be honest with you. It's a little more pen and paper. Let's see if I can hold it up so it stops reflecting. The Essential Aneogram. This is David Daniels and Virginia Price. It's like $10 on Amazon. I think that's the best way to do it, because not only does it help you understand who you are, but objectively how you interact with others. And I think that gives people a lot of insight. One of the first things we do when we have a faculty member or colleague who's struggling or needs, the term we use is remediation, right, in medicine, somebody who's basically being a jerk, is you give them a 360 evaluation. You try to help them understand who they are and how others view them. And so starting with something like a personality test can sometimes help people just understand at a baseline before they get into trouble who they are. And not even if you're in trouble, just help you understand what your strengths and weaknesses are and how you can, better complement them as you build out your practices. So for instance, I tend to be more of a big picture person. I'm not as detail oriented. So I make sure that my administrative assistant is super detail oriented. And she really helps complement me in that, because she will hold me accountable for some of the details I may overlook in an email or in a meeting, that she says, hey, did you do this, this, and this that you were supposed to do? So it can come with your partners, it can come with your assistants, it can come with the nurses and the team you work with. So understand your weaknesses and complement them. It's a lot of fun to work with people that we're exactly like, but we learn nothing from them and we don't necessarily get better. And that's where kind of the diversity, equity, inclusion of this comes in. We get better by bringing in more diverse groups, people who challenge us, people who complement us, rather than just working with people who we're exactly like.
And I have one more question.
Yeah.
I think a lot about our trainees because they have so little control. I think having control is something, and there was a lot to unpack in your talk. But when you have so little control over your time, over your day, et cetera, how do you start to, and for somebody who maybe is bordering on or is burnt out, how do you kind of walk them down this path? How do you start this? Because I feel like that person is kind of a hard person to get started, and I think it's really worthwhile, but it's sometimes hard to get that first step.
Yep, you're absolutely right, Courtney. And I'll tell you, one of the major criticisms of talks like this and the podcast is, well, how the hell am I supposed to do this when I'm a trainee and I'm already burnt out, or I'm young faculty? And listen, in full disclosure, I was not the best as a trainee. This has been a relatively new process for me where, over the last 2 or 3 years, it's become more formal for me, but it affirmed a lot of the good things I was doing and allowed me to get rid of some of the bad things I was doing. But what I tell you, and that's the reason I show that Maslow's hierarchy. And it's important to kind of, like I said, the first thing we give up when we're tired and burnt out are our physical needs and kind of our physiologic needs. But it's actually, it's really important to focus on those things when we're feeling burnt out, when we're feeling crushed, when we're feeling kind of like we have no control. Because we may not have control over the OR schedule or what cases we're covering when we're a trainee, but we do have control of what we do when we get out of the hospital. We may not have that much time. You may not be able to, go to Orange Theory and spend an hour doing, Peloton yoga, but you can certainly give yourself 10 minutes or 15 minutes to reflect, to read, to eat well rather than eat poorly. And one of the great lessons or great questions I like to ask people all the time is, how many of us stay up late at night and watch a stupid Netflix show or something that has no impact on who we are or how we become? It helps us unwind a little bit. There are some benefits there. But if we took that 15 minutes and got up early and went for a walk or had a healthy breakfast rather than just grabbing a breakfast bar or something else, it would be something that kind of works intentionally towards health and healthiness and well-being. And I don't get into routine in this talk, there's just not enough time, but building healthy routines is a huge part of that. So, I wake up every morning now. I've set a glass of water near my bed because as I get older and my prostate's grown, it's hard to drink water before you go to bed because none of us hydrate during the day. I'll be up at night. So I drink water in the morning to hydrate. I do short yoga and mindfulness, and it sets the tone for the day. And notice I mentioned I didn't look at my phone. I didn't look at my email. I didn't see what the hospital said because guess what? It can all wait 15 or 20 minutes while I'm kind of focused on myself. And setting that 15 or 20 minutes for myself in the morning sets a tone for the day that it's about wellness and well-being and that I am important in the context of all of this. And I would encourage people to think about a morning routine. It doesn't have to be what I do. It shouldn't be what I do. You're different than I am. But think about a morning routine that really sets a context for who you are and who you want to be. And it'll help you progress through the day, I think. So that I know is long-winded, but that's my 2 cents on how to get started. First, focus that you need your physiologic needs met before you can climb up the ladder, and the second is create a morning routine that sets a tone. So I could have said that quicker.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Josh, Leon, Alan, Bertie, Jonathan?
Courtney, I have one, not from Kathowitz. First of all, thank you very much. This is not just a reminder, but more of a pathway that I wish we'd been taught years and years ago. But what do you do if you are managing a department and you have a surgeon who's really, really skilled, but really, really not mindful? Skilled surgeons are not that readily available, and the person is not really interested in enlightenment.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It is a real challenge. And what I would encourage you to do is think about what is the priority of your department or your division. And if it's productivity and RVUs and money and cases, then that's somebody you want, right? But if it's taking care of each other and taking care of patients and being a wonderful place to work and practice, then that person may not fit in well with your culture. And that's a struggle we have in medicine. And I think those are the hardest people to let go of. And there are lots of ways to potentially kind of remediate them. There are executive coaches, there are personal coaches, there are things you can do to help those people, but sometimes they're beyond help and you have to make the decision, is it productivity or is it culture? We've made the decision here, it's culture. And that's a hard one to make.
That can get more complex, Philippi, it's Lee, because unfortunately leaders don't always have complete control because we all also work in systems.
Yep.
So then other tensions and conflicts then arise because we're dealing with an imperfect reality, right? Then it's like you're operating within a larger universe. The universe is not necessarily as you wish it so. There are forces you can't control. And then other decisions need to be made at that point. Now, there are certainly folks out there, many of whom were pictured on your slides, who deal with that in incomprehensible, more meaningful ways, such as leaders who are in the midst of massive oppression, violence, oppression, trying to do what is just and right and according to their values, and yet the universe is not aligned with them. So there are obviously much bigger struggles in the universe for folks, but unfortunately it can get very, very complex. I'm wondering if you've experienced that in any way, and then how do you align yourself psychologically to feel that you're true to oneself, but how do you negotiate that? And then a second question also, I haven't really formulated the question, unfortunately, perfectly in my mind. But I think the other thing that is is of interest to me in your talk, which is wonderful, by the way. It's just no matter where anyone stands on it or whatever they think about it, it's a great time to just think about what we do in a totally different way, and it's therapeutic, and I think good for all of us just to be thinking about these things. But when it comes to our mentoring roles, one way with which I look at everything you talked about is insight. Right? Like, how insightful are you about who you are, what you're doing, what your problems are, what your strengths are? Like, do you have insight? And a lot of people don't have insight, can be very defensive, and often they're lower on the pyramid that you're talking about. There's more of a defensive, their sense of where they are in the universe is less clear. And yet we're in an environment where you're supposed, it's about feedback. And then, so I guess my question really is how to give feedback when you have someone who does not necessarily have the highest levels of insight or ability to be open to it, even though they kind of on the surface may say they want to be, but they're not insightful.
Yeah, no, Lee, you bring up two amazingly challenging topics, and the first one is I think more challenging, to be honest with you, because you're right, we're in these systems and it's not always our choice, right? If we had our own, and where we see it often is not only with the surgeons and the physicians, but with our staff, right? In a big hospital system, you can't get rid of an administrative assistant, or you can't get rid of a nurse. I mean, that first of all, we all have shortages, but second of all, I mean, it takes an act of, God to make sometimes that happen through HR. So yeah, it's incredibly challenging. But I guess the point of it is kind of come to value people more than productivity is the way I kind of put it. And I recognize I'm pretty junior in this role and in my career compared to some other people. But I think the military example is great here. If you talk to the military about their priorities and the way they train soldiers it's soldiers, then mission, then, God and country, right? And I think the same analogy holds true for medicine. If we put patient care above each other, then it sometimes puts us at odds with each other, in the sense that we can compete for RVUs, or we can compete for patients, or we can compete for outcomes. But if we put each other first, whether this is surgeons or nurses or assistants, we put the team first, we're working towards taking care of each other and building common goals, then we can care for patients in a better and more aligned way. And that's, I think, a departure from our traditional teaching and thoughts in medicine. And it's something I'm working on. I'm not sure it's necessarily going to work or the right way, but it's something we're actively working on, and I talk to the staff here about all of the time. So that may be one way to approach it. I don't have a perfect answer for you there. And the second question was how to deal with the person who's not insightful. That's really challenging, and that gets to that whole self-identity conflict issue. And I think as you climb up the ladder of leadership, and you know this very well, we're kind of obliged to be more and more honest with people, because ultimately it becomes our responsibility for kind of the whole program or the whole picture. And if somebody's behaving poorly, their behavior reflects on us. And so sometimes we can't change that behavior, but we have to at least make them aware of it, and we have to talk about it. And the way I talk to people about this now is in a very brief framework, and this is a longer conversation. But the first thing is, when somebody gives you negative feedback, or you have a negative interaction, or you have a bad complication, there are emotions associated with that. The first thing is own those emotions. And I tell people this explicitly, own it. Like, let it wash over you, because the more you try and push those things off or deny them, the more it's just going to push this interaction down the road. So it's okay if what I'm going to tell you is really going to piss you off. Walk away from the office, be pissed off, and then come back and talk to me when you're not as pissed off. Second thing is try to approach this like a M&M, right, or a quality approach. What are the systems influences here? Why is this behavior happening? What happened outside of me and this circumstance that kind of contributed to it? The third part is what we don't do in M&M, which is what are the actual personal interactions? What are the personality things? What are the individual reasons why something may have gone bad or poorly, and trying to understand those. And the whole point is trying to get to the last part of this is, what is the underlying kind of truth? And we've all had negative experiences. We've all had bad outcomes. And it's so easy. The easiest analogy is to say we've had a complication, and it's easy to say this was biology, this was disease, this was what the patient brought to us, that's why things went poorly. Yeah, there's probably some truth to that, but there's also a really deep and honest truth in sitting there and saying, I could have done something better. And that's where we want to get to, is the point where you say, I could have done something better. And once again, there's a great analogy here, once again, from the military. The Navy SEALs have kind of an approach of extreme ownership. And for instance, if a mission goes badly, and let's say it's because the weather changed on them suddenly, they'll sit there and review and go, what could we have done better? We can't change the weather, but maybe we could have predicted better. We could have had better communication with our weather services. We could have done something different. It's always something you can do better. There is some truth there. So that's the way I talk to people about these bad things. So sorry if that was a little long-winded too, and try to help them get insight.
Great talk, and really enjoyed it. I didn't hear it, but you may have said it. You didn't use the word ethics, and
Yeah.
I'm interested in your interpretation of the interface of these two concepts.
Yeah, right. Ethics is much more subjective than we would hope it would be, right? So, kind of, we all build our own ethical framework, and that, in my opinion, it's kind of based on our priorities, right? So, as I said, my priority is my wife and my children. There are people whose priority may be financial, and I'm not one to criticize them. That's their priority. That's what they want to do. So their ethical construct may be completely different than mine. And that may not be the most popular thing to say.
I just lost you. I don't know if everybody else can hear you.
Phil, I think your mute button was hit just in the middle of that. You were saying that for some folks, their financial gain may be the priority.
Yep.
And then
Gotcha.
we lost you.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I lost internet for a second, and then it hit me on mute. So say, yeah, so some people may have, a financial priority, and listen, that may not be the most popular thing to say, but that's okay. That may be their truth, and that may define their ethical constructs. And, instead of trying to belittle or change or kind of influence, it's kind of understand who they are and what their ethical process is and why it may be different from yours, and not necessarily how to change them, but how to interact with them and how to coexist with them. It's hard to change other people. You can change yourself, you can change your relationship with that person, but it's really hard to change other people, especially if they don't want to be changed. So I don't know if that's a great answer for you or what you were expecting me to say, but ethics definitely play a role, but we've each got our own ethical framework, I think, to be honest with you.
But that would imply that ethics are only defined by the individual, and one's own ethical code supersedes the standards of society, especially in medicine. I'm troubled by that answer, actually.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Listen, if your ethical code, here's the counter to that, is if your ethical code is counter to what society is, you're going to end up in trouble, right? And we've seen that. So yeah, we have to develop our ethical codes as an individual in the context that we exist. So I don't think we're at odds with each other here, Dr. Nagler, to be honest with you. But yeah, great point.
I like that finesse at the end. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Hi, this is Andy Das. It's a great talk. Having been sort of raised in Hinduism, or when I was sent to India as a young person and growing up with my grandparents, one of the concepts of dharma that was really talked to us about was duty. And, the concept of duty to self, duty to your wife and kids, which you talked about, duty to your trainees, duty to your partners, and some of the conflicts that arise from where you put that, which duty comes first. But to us, the duty fact was kind of pushed in so hard. It's always a concept in my life that I'm always thinking about, just as a sort of a different counter.
Yeah, it's a beautiful reflection. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a big part of it. I didn't use the word duty outright, but yeah, it's a huge part of the Dharma concept is how that plays into it.
Any other questions, folks? Well, Phil, I want to thank you. I think this was an incredible lecture. I really do. Penn is truly lucky to have you, and I think urology is lucky to have you in a leadership position, because these are incredibly important thoughts and observations. You know, I feel it from my perspective, and I think we really need to give them the attention that it deserves. So thank you so much. I think this will go down for me, and I think for everyone, as one of the highlights of our Grand Round schedule this year. I think it's a tremendous amount of food for thought that can affect us in very profound ways, from the intern to the chair and everything in between. So I really do thank you. This is terrific. Good luck on this next chapter in your career. It's so well deserved, and I think you're a perfect person to be helping to lead there. So it's wonderful, and we applaud you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I would just like to say, listen, if you get nothing out of this lecture other than it's okay and we should be talking about these things, right? These are things we should be talking about, expressing with each other and investigating together. That's how we're going to be a better surgical community. It's how we're going to be better surgeons. So thanks.
Agreed. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Phil. Good luck.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, guys.